terrified. What after he found out shocking truth is scary. He wasn't supposed to stop. He had a city to run, and men waiting on his word. But something made Garrison Wolfe walk up to that gas station counter at midnight, and what he found stopped him cold. 2 fingers under her chin, tilting her bruised face gently toward the light. She flinched, not from his touch, from the habit of being hurt. And something ancient and dangerous woke up inside the most feared man in the city. He had caused fear before, but this was different. This was a woman who had stopped expecting anyone to notice, and Garrison Wolfe had just noticed. If that kind of story and ring that notification bell. Now let's get into it. Garrison Wolfe did not do anything without a reason. That was the first rule of survival in his world, and the last rule standing after 30 years of navigating a city that rewarded the careful and buried the careless. Every movement deliberate. Every decision weighed. Every room entered only after its contents had been understood from the outside. He was not a man who stopped at roadside gas stations at midnight on impulse. And yet, he had been driving back from a meeting that had run 3 hours longer than it should have. The kind of meeting that happened in the private back room of a restaurant that didn't appear on any review site, with men whose names didn't appear on any org chart. His driver had taken the route along Callaway Road, the older route, the one that cut through neighborhoods that still looked the way the city had looked when Garrison was coming up through it with nothing but hunger and nerve. He took this route sometimes when he needed to think, when the weight of the empire required the particular perspective that only came from remembering where it had started. The gas station sat at the junction of Callaway and Fifth, a flat, fluorescent-lit rectangle of bulletproof glass and rotating hot dog machines that had been serving the same neighborhood for 20-odd years. Garrison noticed it the way he noticed everything on this route. Briefly, functionally, without sentiment. Then he saw her through the glass. He told his driver to pull over. The driver, a former military man named Setch, who had worked for Garrison for 9 years and understood that certain instructions required no explanation, pulled over without a word. Garrison got out alone. The bell above the door announced him with a cheerful indifference to the kind of man walking through it. The store was empty of customers. The overhead lighting was the particular shade of yellow that made everything look slightly unwell. A radio somewhere in the back was playing something country and low, and behind the counter, a young woman was restocking cigarette cartons on the shelf behind the register, with the mechanical efficiency of someone running on the last reserves of whatever had been keeping her going. She turned when she heard the bell. Garrison's trained eye cataloged her in under 2 seconds, the way it cataloged everything. The dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had given up hours ago. The work shirt with the gas station logo that was a size too large. The careful way she was holding her left side as she turned. And the bruises. Foundation had been applied over them with obvious effort and obvious failure. The kind of purple-green that defeats most drugstore coverage sitting along her jaw and trailing down the left side of her neck like a sentence someone had tried to erase. She arranged her face into the professional approximation of a welcome and said good evening, in a voice that was steady in the way that things are steady when steadiness has been practiced under duress. Garrison walked to the counter. He asked for a pack of cigarettes, a brand he didn't smoke, pulled from a half-remembered billboard he had passed on the highway. She turned to locate it on the shelf behind her, and he watched the way she moved. Careful, measured. The particular economy of motion that belonged to someone navigating a body that hurt in more than one place simultaneously. She set the pack on the counter and told him the price. He didn't reach for his wallet immediately. Instead, he looked at her, not with the assessing sweep he used on rivals, or the flat appraisal he used on subordinates, but with the direct, unhurried attention of a man who has decided to actually see what is in front of him. She registered it. Her eyes moved to the counter. "Long shift?" he asked. "Every shift's long," she said. "Automatic. Practiced." The answer of someone who deflects personal questions before they fully form. He put his money on the counter. She counted change with hands that were not entirely steady, a fine tremor running through her fingers that she was clearly accustomed to managing, and clearly hoping nobody noticed. He noticed. He always noticed. She pushed the change toward him. He reached out, slowly, with the deliberate telegraphing of someone who understood the particular language of people who flinched at sudden movement. And instead of taking the change, he placed 2 fingers gently under her chin, tilted her face toward the overhead light. Just enough. She went completely still. The bruise along her jaw was worse than the foundation had suggested. Fresh, maybe 36 hours old, layering over something older and yellowing underneath. The one on her neck had the specific shape that came from fingers. Garrison had seen that shape before on people who worked for him when things had gone badly wrong. He knew exactly what made it. He released her chin. She stepped back. Not dramatically, just the single step of someone creating distance out of reflex. And her eyes finally came up to meet his fully for the first time. What he found in them was not what most people showed him. Most people showed him fear when they looked at him directly. She showed him something more complicated. Exhaustion. Wariness. And underneath both of those, buried so deep it was barely a flicker, the raw and cautious question of whether the person in front of her was something other than another problem to manage. "You should see someone about that," Garrison said quietly. "I'm fine," she said. "You're not." The door behind the counter, marked staff, slightly ajar, pushed open. A man filled the frame, heavy-set, mid-40s, wearing a short-sleeved shirt despite the cold, and an expression that assessed the situation with the particular calculation of someone measuring a threat. His eyes went to Della, then to Garrison, then back to Della with a look that communicated something that had nothing to do with Garrison's presence, and everything to do with what would come after it. "Everything all right out here?" the man asked. His voice carried the synthetic warmth of someone who had learned to perform friendliness as a control mechanism. "Fine," Della said immediately. Too immediately. "Just helping a customer." The man looked at Garrison for a moment longer than was comfortable. Garrison looked back with the particular quality of stillness that tended to resolve these situations without words. The man didn't close all the way. Della was already looking at the counter. Garrison picked up his cigarettes and his change. He looked at her once more, at the careful way she had reassembled the professional neutrality across her face the moment that door had opened, at the almost imperceptible way her shoulders had drawn in, at the hands that had stilled themselves through what was clearly an act of will. "What's your name?" he asked. A pause, brief but real. "Della." He nodded once. He walked to the door. He pushed through it into the cold night air and crossed to where Setch was waiting with the engine running. He got in. He did not speak for a full minute. Then he said, "I need everything on a gas station on the corner of Callaway and 5th. Owner, employees, finances, everything." He paused. "Tonight, Setch." Setch pulled into traffic without a word. Behind them, through the receding rectangle of yellow light, Della Marsh was already back to restocking cigarette cartons. Holding her left side, moving carefully, alone in the fluorescent glow of a store that had no idea what had just walked through its door. The report arrived before sunrise. Setch had learned over 9 years of service that when Garrison Wolfe said, "tonight," he meant it with the particular finality of someone who had never once in his adult life accepted a deadline as negotiable. By 4:30 in the morning, a sealed folder sat on Garrison's desk in his private office. The real one, on the upper floor of a building that appeared in city records as a property management firm, and functioned as the nerve center of everything Garrison actually ran. He opened it with his third coffee of the night and read without stopping. Della Marsh, 27 years old. Born and raised in a small city 4 hours north. The kind of place that produced people who worked hard and expected nothing decorative from life. Arrived in the city 14 months ago. No criminal record. No debt beyond a modest student loan from 2 semesters of a nursing program she had left without completing. The reason for leaving wasn't in any official record, but the timing told its own story. She had withdrawn the same semester her younger brother Cody had entered a residential rehabilitation facility 3 states away. The facility was not cheap. The facility had been billing consistently for 7 months. Garrison did the math on her gas station salary without needing a calculator. She was sending nearly a third of every paycheck to keep Cody there. The remainder covered a studio apartment in a building that his people had flagged as substandard on 3 separate city inspections. Groceries. and the kind of incidental expenses that disappeared when you were running on the thinnest possible margin. There was no cushion. There was no fallback. Every dollar had somewhere it needed to be before it arrived, which meant she could not afford to lose the job, which meant Rule Tanner knew exactly what he had. Tanner's file was the second section of the report, and it was considerably less clean than Della's. 51 years old, owner of 3 gas station convenience stores operating across the city's older neighborhoods, all of them profitable on paper, in ways that didn't entirely reconcile with their locations and foot traffic. 2 prior complaints filed against him by former female employees, one from 4 years ago, one from 18 months prior. Neither complaint had progressed beyond the initial filing stage. Both women had withdrawn statements within weeks. Both had left the city entirely within months. Garrison recognized the pattern without needing it explained. The third section of the report covered the backroom operation. Tanner's associate, a wiry, restless man named Spade, who occupied the store's back office on the late shift, with the territorial energy of someone guarding something valuable, was running a distribution relay through the storage facility. Small volume, carefully timed, the kind of operation designed to stay beneath the threshold of serious law enforcement attention. Deliveries came through the rear entrance between 1 and 3 in the morning. Della's shifts covered exactly that window. She hadn't chosen to know what she knew, but she knew it. And Tanner had made certain she understood that what she knew made her complicit, and that complicit people did not go to the police, and that people who didn't understand that needed to be reminded until they did. Garrison closed the folder. He sat in his office, while the city outside his window moved from the deep quiet of pre-dawn into the gray, early stirring of morning. And he thought about Della Marsh, restocking cigarette cartons with careful movements, and foundation that didn't quite cover what it was meant to cover. He thought about the way she had gone completely still when he tilted her face toward the light. The way the door behind the counter hadn't closed all the way when Tanner's man retreated. The way her hands had stilled themselves through an act of pure will. He thought about the question he had seen buried underneath the exhaustion in her eyes. He picked up his phone, called Breck, his most trusted lieutenant, a former investigator with 20 years of experience reading situations from the inside out, and spoke for 4 minutes without interruption. Breck asked 2 questions. Garrison answered both. Breck said he understood, and ended the call. The next evening, Garrison went back to the gas station. Same plain jacket, same deliberate unremarkability. He had spent 30 years building an empire, partly on the understanding that the most dangerous configuration a powerful man could assume was the appearance of having nothing. He assumed it now with the ease of long practice, and pushed through the door into the yellow light. Della was behind the counter. She saw him, and something moved across her face that she didn't fully manage to contain before it passed. Not fear, and not the wariness she had shown him the night before, but a complicated flicker of recognition that carried more than one thing inside it. She had been thinking about him. He had expected that. People who had been seen for the first time in a long time tended to think about the person who had done it. He bought a bottle of water he didn't need. She processed the transaction with the professional neutrality she wore like a uniform. He didn't push the conversation. He made one low-key observation about the cold outside. She responded with 2 words, and he took his water and sat in the small seating area near the window. 2 plastic chairs and a laminate table that existed primarily for lottery ticket scratching, and simply remained. He stayed for 40 minutes. He watched Tanner's man Spade emerge from the back room twice. Once to surveil the floor with the proprietary sweep of someone taking inventory of their assets. Once to say something to Della in a low voice that made her nod quickly and look at the counter. He watched 2 late customers come and go. He watched Della's hands loosen incrementally across the course of the evening, as the minutes between Spade's appearances stretched. When he left, he said goodnight. She said goodnight back. It was 8 words between them total across 40 minutes. It was more than it sounded like. He came back the following night, and the night after that. By the 4th visit, something had shifted in the way Della received him. The wariness was still present. It wasn't going anywhere quickly, and he wasn't asking it to. But alongside it had appeared a very tentative and very careful ease. He was predictable. He bought something small. He didn't ask intrusive questions. He didn't look at her the way Spade looked at her, or the way certain late-night customers looked at her. He looked at her like a person who had somewhere to be and had chosen to be here instead, which was unusual enough in her experience to register as significant. On the fifth night, she asked him what he did. He said he worked in property. It was true enough not to feel like a lie, and vague enough not to invite follow-up. She accepted it with a small nod. Then she said, almost to herself, that she had wanted to work in healthcare once, before things got complicated. Garrison looked at her. What complicated them? She was quiet for a moment, long enough that he thought she had decided not to answer. Then she said, family stuff, in the tone that people use when family stuff contains multitudes they are not ready to open. Brother? Garrison said. Her eyes came up sharply. Lucky guess, he said. It wasn't a lucky guess, but she didn't need to know that yet. What she needed was for someone to sit across from her in a gas station at midnight and treat the fragments she was willing to offer with enough care that she might eventually offer more. He stayed another 30 minutes. He left when Spade emerged from the back room, with a look in his direction that carried the early stirring of suspicion. Walking to the car, Garrison called Breck. The brothers' facility, he said. 3 months of fees, anonymous, clean. He paused. And Breck, I want to know the moment Tanner finds out. He already knew what would happen when Tanner found out. He was counting on it. Because Garrison Wolfe had spent 30 years understanding that the fastest way to expose a man's true nature was to disturb something he believed he controlled completely. Tanner was about to be disturbed. The call from Breck came on a Thursday evening. Tanner knew not everything, not who had made the payment, not why, not the shape of what was moving toward him. But he knew that 3 months of fees at Cody's rehabilitation facility had been covered by an anonymous source. And he knew that Della hadn't done it herself, because Della didn't have that kind of money. And he had made absolutely certain of that. Someone from outside had reached into the arrangement he had constructed so carefully around her, and touched something they had no business touching. Breck's voice on the phone was characteristically flat. He pulled her into the back office 20 minutes ago. Spade's in there too. My man outside says it's been loud. Garrison was already moving toward the car. How loud? The kind that breaks things. He didn't respond. He ended the call and told Setch the address and sat in the back of the car with the particular stillness that people who knew him well had learned to read correctly. It wasn't calm. It was the precise opposite of calm, compressed into a single controlled register and held there through 30 years of discipline. The gas station appeared through the windshield 14 minutes later, fluorescent and indifferent against the night sky. Garrison told Setch to park across the street. He sat for 90 seconds watching the storefront. One customer visible through the glass, browsing. No Della at the register. The back office door, visible at an angle through the window, was closed. He got out of the car. The bell announced him with its customary cheerfulness. The browsing customer glanced up and returned to the refrigerated section. The register was unmanned. From behind the closed back office door came the low, pressurized sound of a man's voice, delivering something that was not a conversation. Garrison walked to the counter. He waited. He kept his breathing even and his hands loose at his sides. And he listened to the voice behind that door, with the focused attention of someone translating a language they knew fluently. The door opened. Della came through it first. Her foundation had been disturbed on the left side. Not freshly, but recently enough. Her eyes found Garrison immediately, and the expression that crossed her face was the most complicated thing he had seen in a long time. Relief and terror arriving simultaneously, fighting each other for position. Spade came through the door behind her. He saw Garrison and stopped. His expression ran through several calculations in quick succession before settling on hostility as its default position. "We're closed," he said. "Sign on the door says 24 hours, Garrison replied. "Sign's wrong." Garrison looked at Della. She had positioned herself behind the counter with the register between her and Spade, a small, tactical distance that she had created with the instinct of someone who had learned to put objects between themselves and certain people. Her hands were pressed flat on the counter, She was looking at Garrison with an expression that was asking him something she couldn't say out loud. Tanner emerged from the back office. He was a big man, not tall but wide, with the soft weight of someone who had spent years behind a desk, arranging for other people to do the physical work. He looked at Garrison with small, assessing eyes, and the expression of a man who had spent enough time managing difficult situations to believe he could manage this one. "Store's closing early tonight," Tanner said. His voice had the synthetic pleasantness Garrison had cataloged on his first visit. "Appreciate your business." Garrison didn't move. "I'll wait while she finishes her shift." The pleasantness thinned. "That's not going to work for us." "I wasn't asking what works for you." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Spade shifted his weight, a small movement, the kind that preceded larger ones. Tanner's eyes narrowed. He was recalculating. Garrison could see it happening, running the math on who this man was and why he wasn't moving, and what category of problem he represented. He didn't have enough information to calculate correctly. That was intentional. "I don't know who you think you are," Tanner started. "No," Garrison agreed pleasantly. "You don't." He reached into his jacket pocket, slowly, visibly, the practiced movement of someone demonstrating transparency, and placed a phone on the counter. The screen was facing up. On it was a photograph. Tanner looked at it. The color left his face in a way that was almost architectural, like a building losing its structural support floor by floor. The photograph showed the rear entrance of the gas station at 1:47 in the morning, 3 weeks prior. Two men carrying a specific kind of container through a door that was being held open by Spade. "I have 41 more," Garrison said. "Different nights, different faces, same door." He let that settle for exactly the right amount of time. "The people in these photographs work for an organization that has been trying to establish a foothold in this part of the city for 2 years. I have been patiently discouraging that effort." He picked up the phone. "Your store has been part of their infrastructure for 8 months without my knowledge. That situation ends tonight." Tanner's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Spade was very still in the way that people go still when they have assessed a situation and arrived at the conclusion that movement of any kind would be inadvisable. Garrison looked at Della. She was watching him with an expression that had moved beyond the relief and terror combination into something rawer and more fundamental. The expression of someone watching a reality they thought they understood reorganize itself completely around them. "Get your things," Garrison said quietly. She didn't hesitate. She reached under the counter, retrieved a jacket and a small bag, and came around from behind the register with the deliberate movement of someone who has made a decision and is not revisiting it. She walked to where Garrison was standing and stopped beside him. Tanner found his voice. "She's not going anywhere. She works for me, and she knows things that are no longer your concern," Garrison said. The pleasantness in his own voice had been put away. What replaced it was something quieter and considerably more final. What she knows, what she's seen, what she's been made to carry for 8 months. None of it touches her. Are we clear on that? Tanner looked at the phone in Garrison's hand. He looked at Spade, who offered him nothing. He looked at Della, who was not looking at him at all. "Whatever leverage you think you have over her family," Garrison continued, "is already gone. The situation with her brother was resolved 3 days ago. Permanently." He held Tanner's gaze. "You have nothing, and I would strongly encourage you to spend the remainder of this evening thinking carefully about the difference between the problem you have right now and the considerably larger problem you will have if I leave here unhappy." The silence that followed had the quality of something collapsing inward. Garrison gestured toward the door. Della walked through it. He followed without looking back at Tanner or Spade. A deliberate choice. The particular statement made by a man who doesn't check whether a threat has landed, because he has never once delivered one that didn't. Outside, the cold air hit them both. Setch had the car running. Della stopped on the pavement and turned to face Garrison with the night air moving between them and the gas station fluorescence behind her, and an expression on her face that contained more questions than either of them had time for right now. "Who are you?" she asked. "Someone who noticed," Garrison said. "We'll talk tomorrow. properly. He opened the car door. Tonight, you're going somewhere safe. She looked at the car. She looked at him. And Della Marsh, who had spent 8 months surviving on the thinnest possible margin with nobody watching her back, made the calculation that the one person who had consistently shown up without taking anything deserved, at minimum, the benefit of the doubt. She got in. The office Garrison used for conversations that mattered was nothing like what people imagined when they imagined where a man like him conducted his affairs. No marble, no excess. Just a clean, quiet room on the fourth floor of a legitimate building downtown. Good furniture, good light, and the particular atmosphere of a space where serious things got said without performance. Della sat across from him the following afternoon, looking like someone who had slept for the first time in months and wasn't entirely sure how to feel about it. Breck had arranged a safe apartment the night before. Clean, secure, stocked with the practical necessities by someone who understood that what a person needed after 8 months of surviving was not luxury, but simply the absence of threat. She had slept 9 hours. She looked it. She also looked like someone with a significant number of questions and the measured patience of a woman who had learned to wait for the right moment to ask them. Garrison let her set the pace. She looked around the office once, taking it in with the quiet thoroughness he had noticed in her from the beginning, the way she read rooms without appearing to read them. Then she looked at him. "Tell me," she said. So he did. He told her his name. He told her what he ran and how and roughly the scale of it. Not everything, not the granular operational details that served no purpose here, but enough. Enough for her to understand what she was sitting across from. Enough for the context of the past 2 weeks to reorganize itself correctly in her mind. He watched her face as he spoke and saw her doing exactly that, reordering the visits, the quiet conversations, the water bottles and the 40-minute silences, through the lens of who he actually was. She didn't interrupt. She didn't recoil. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, her hands folded on the table in front of her. And then she said, "The payment for Cody's facility. That was you." "Yes. Before you knew whether I'd cooperate with anything. Before you knew what I'd do." "Yes." She looked at the table. "Why?" "Because it was the right thing to do. Men in your position don't usually operate on what's right." "No," Garrison agreed. "They don't." She looked up. "So why do you?" He considered the answer with the honesty the question deserved. "I grew up in a neighborhood 3 miles from that gas station," he said. "My mother worked nights. Convenience store, actually. Different one, same fluorescent lights, same night shift exhaustion. There was a man who managed the building we lived in who understood that we needed the apartment more than we could afford it. He used that understanding the same way Tanner used his." Garrison kept his voice level. "She endured it for 4 years because leaving meant the street. Nobody intervened. Nobody noticed. Or if they noticed, they decided it wasn't their business." Della was very still. "I noticed you," Garrison said simply. "And I was in a position to do something about what I noticed. So I did." The quiet that followed was the kind that didn't need filling. Outside the office window, the city conducted its afternoon business in complete indifference to the conversation happening 4 floors above it. "Tanner," Della said eventually. "What happens to him?" "His operation is already unwinding. The distribution relay through your store has been shut down. The organization he was hosting has been informed that the arrangement is permanently concluded." Garrison paused. "His finances are being reviewed by people with the appropriate authority to review them. The 2 women who filed complaints against him previously, their statements have been low case time. And Spade? Gone." Della absorbed this. "And me," she said. "What happens to me?" "Nothing happens to you," Garrison said. "You're free. Cody's facility is covered for the next 18 months. No strings, no obligation. Whatever you knew about the backroom operation is protected. Nobody is coming after you for knowledge you never asked to have. You walk out of this office, and your life is yours again." He held her gaze. "That's it. That's all of it." She looked at him for a long time, with those dark eyes that had always carried more intelligence than her circumstances had been given credit for. "You're not asking for anything." "No." People don't do things like this for nothing. Some do, Garrison said. Not many, but some. She looked at her hands. He could see her working through it. The instinct that had kept her alive for 8 months, telling her that generosity of this scale always had a mechanism underneath it, while something quieter and more recent pushed back against that instinct with the evidence of the past 2 weeks. He waited. He had learned that Della Marsh arrived at her conclusions through her own process and on her own schedule, and that the worst thing you could do was try to accelerate either. "There's something I want to say," she said finally. "Say it." "I'm angry." She said it plainly, without heat. Not at you, at the situation. At 8 months of getting up every day and going back to that place because the alternative was Cody losing his spot in the facility. At covering Bruises with foundation before a shift. At knowing what was happening in that back room and understanding that knowing it was exactly what kept me from being able to leave. She paused. "I'm angry that it took someone accidentally stopping at a gas station to change it. That there was no system, no mechanism, just luck." "You're right to be angry," Garrison said. "I know I am." She looked at him. "I'm also grateful. Those two things are both true at the same time, and I'm done pretending complicated feelings need to be simple." The corner of Garrison's mouth moved. "That's a reasonable position." She sat forward slightly. "You mentioned a job." He had, briefly, through Breck, as part of the practical arrangements made the night before. He had deliberately left the details thin. He hadn't wanted it to feel like a condition. "I own a legitimate property management company," he said. "Administrative coordinator position. Day hours, benefits, salary that doesn't require you to choose between rent and your brother's recovery. The work is real. I need someone organized and observant who understands how buildings and the people inside them actually function." He paused. "You have both of those qualities in significant measure. You'd hire me because of a gas station? I'd hire you because in 8 months of being systematically trapped and pressured and hurt, you never stopped paying attention. You never stopped thinking. You never stopped protecting your brother even when it cost you everything." He held her gaze. "That's not a gas station. That's character." Della was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'd need to finish my nursing credits eventually. It was always the plan before everything fell apart. The position includes tuition support." She looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between wry and genuinely moved. "You had that ready." "I had it ready," he confirmed. She stood. He stood. She extended her hand across the desk with the directness of someone who had decided and was done deliberating. He shook it. "I have one condition," Della said. "Name it. You don't get to be mysterious about who you are anymore. If I'm working for you, I work for you with full information. No more property consultant performance. No more arriving in plain jackets and pretending to want water." The directness in her eyes was absolute. "I know what you are. I'm choosing to step into that with open eyes. But I need the eyes to actually be open." Garrison looked at her. This woman who had survived 8 months of a situation designed to break her and come out the other side with her intelligence intact and her terms ready. "Agreed," he said. She nodded once. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. She walked to the door and then turned back with one hand on the frame. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "your mother would have deserved someone like you walking into her store." She left before he could respond. Garrison stood in his office for a long moment after the door closed. The city continued outside his window, indifferent, relentless, entirely unaware of the small and significant things happening inside it. He had run this city for 30 years on the principle that power existed to protect the person holding it. He was beginning to revise that principle, not abandon it, revise it, into something that had more room in it for the people who deserve protection and never got it. For the Della Marshes working night shifts under fluorescent lights, for the women who had come before her, for the mothers 3 miles from gas stations who endured because nobody intervened. He couldn't fix all of it. He had never been naive enough to believe he could. But he could notice, and he could act on what he noticed. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that was the thing that changed everything. If this story still Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the people nobody notices are often the ones carrying the most.